Hey guys, tonight we're going back to the grit, the glory, and the grinding gears of the Roman Empire. But we're not just surviving this time. We're not just waking up in a death trap and trying not to get dysentery before breakfast. Tonight we're climbing, or at least we're trying to. We're diving headfirst into the merciless, magnificent machine of Roman society. Not the version written on victory arches, but the one lived on the cracked flagstones, in the shadow of giants, a daily battle, not for bread, but for relevance, for a single nod from a man who holds your entire future in the fold of his toga. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely appreciate the journey we take here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from, and what the air smells like where you are. It's always fascinating to see how the world tunes in. Now, dim the lights. Find that quiet hum. The one that sounds like a city sleeping, because the city we're going to isn't sleeping. It's waking up, and it's hungry. Let's begin our climb together. The sun is still a rumor, a pale blush on the eastern hills that hasn't yet dared to touch the stinking alleys of the Subura, but you are already awake. You've been awake for an hour, your body a finely tuned instrument of anxiety. Sleep is a luxury for children and the dead. You have an appointment with power. You pull on your one decent tunic, the one with the fewest stains, and run a wet hand through your hair. It does nothing. You chew on a fennel stalk to kill the sour taste in your mouth, and step out into the cold, damp air. You're not heading to a construction site. You're not hauling bricks. Your first job of the day is far more delicate and infinitely more humiliating. You are a client, and you are heading for the morning salutation, the daily ritual of allegiance. You join a river of other shadows, all flowing in the same direction, towards the grand houses on the Palatine or Esquiline hills. You arrive at your patron's villa. The great bronze doors are still sealed, silent, judging, and you are not the first one here. You take your place in line. This is a silent, brutal battlefield. A man to your left, a former soldier with a limp, straightens his tunic, his face a mask of practiced deference. A woman behind you, a widow trying to secure a small loan, clutches a scroll, her knuckles white. You are all sharks in a very small, very cold pond, circling, waiting for the dead meat to drop. The air is thick with the smell of damp wool, cheap wine from the night before, and a symphony of quiet desperation. You practice your greeting in your head, not too eager, not too familiar. A perfect blend of respect and self-worth that you absolutely do not feel. You are here to trade your dignity for survival. The currency of the morning is flattery, and you are about to spend every last drop. An hour passes. The sky lightens from charcoal to bruised purple. The sounds of the city begin to stir. A distant baker shouting, the rumble of a cart on the stones. But here, in the shadow of your patron's house, there is only the sound of shuffling feet and nervous coughing. A slave finally unbolts the massive doors. The sound echoes like a death sentence, and a prayer answered all at once. The line begins to move, a slow, shuffling centipede of hope and dread. You step into the atrium, and for a moment, you forget why you're here. The floor is a mosaic of a kraken devouring a ship, so vivid you're afraid to step on it. Water trickles from a marble fountain, shaped like a nymph. The walls are painted with scenes from the Trojan War, Achilles dragging Hector's body in vibrant, horrifying detail. The air inside is different. It smells of expensive incense, of beeswax, of a world you can see and touch, but never truly enter. You are a ghost in this palace of a man who barely knows your name. Then he appears, your patron, Marcus Octavius Falco. He descends the stairs, not like a man, but like a minor god. His toga is blindingly white, with the broad purple stripe of a senator. A gold ring glints on his finger. He smells of exotic oils and power. He doesn't walk, he glides, followed by a retinue of secretaries and bodyguards. He doesn't look at the line, he looks through it. Your turn comes. You step forward, your heart hammering against your ribs. You bow your head. Av, Damen, you murmur. Greetings, Lord. You offer a compliment you rehearsed all morning. Something about his recent speech in the Curia. A speech you only heard about from a drunken herald. You praise his wisdom, his strength, his generosity. The words taste like ash in your mouth. He doesn't look you in the eye. His gaze is fixed on a point just over your shoulder. He might nod. He might grunt. His secretary, a sharp-eyed Greek freedman who holds more real power than you'll ever dream of, makes a small tick on a wax tablet. Then, the moment of truth. A slave hands you the sportula, the daily allowance. Today, it's not a basket of food. It's a small leather pouch. You don't dare open it here. But you can feel it. A few bronze coins. Enough for bread, and maybe some watered-down wine. Not enough to fix the leak in your roof. Not enough to buy medicine for your coughing child. But enough for today. Gracious, Damen, you whisper to the air. Where he just stood, he's already moved on to the next supplicant. The next piece of human furniture in his grand morning theater. You are dismissed. You turn and walk out, back through the bronze doors, into the now bright morning. The kraken on the floor seems to mock you. The sunlight feels harsh, accusatory. You clutch the small pouch in your hand. It feels warm. It feels heavy. It feels like the price of your soul. And now, with your daily dignity paid for, it's time to join the roar of the machine. You push your way into the heart of the beast, the Roman Forum. If your patron's house was a theater of quiet desperation, this is an opera of glorious, deafening chaos. It's not a place. It's a frequency, a vibration that travels up from the flagstones, through the soles of your sandals, and into your bones. It's the sound of an empire, arguing with itself. Before you even see it, you hear it. A wall of sound built from 1,000 competing noises. The high-pitched shriek of a lawyer from the Basilica Julia, his voice cracking as he accuses a merchant of diluting his wine. The rhythmic clinking of coins from the tables of the money changers. A sound as constant and seductive as a siren's call. The low guttural chanting of priests leading a white bull, garlanded with flowers, to be sacrificed at the temple of Saturn. The roar of a crowd gathering at the rostra, where a politician with a face like a clenched fist is promising cheaper grain and another war. You are a single drop of water in a raging ocean. The crowd is a physical entity, a living creature that pushes and pulls, breathes garlic and sweat, and has no regard for personal space. You're jostled by a courier with a leather satchel, nearly tripped by a group of schoolboys chasing a stray dog, and shoved aside by the litter of a noble woman. Her face hidden behind a silk curtain, carried by 4 sweating slaves who look at you with eyes as dead as gravel. You keep one hand on your newly acquired coin purse. This is a paradise for pickpockets, who move through the crowd like ghosts, their fingers as nimble as a surgeon's. You look up, and the sheer scale of it all threatens to swallow you. Towering marble columns claw at the sky. The Senate House, the Curia, stands squat and imposing, a place where the fates of millions are decided by men who have never known a day of real hunger. The triumphal arches of Titus and Septimius Severus loom over you, their carvings of conquered peoples and stolen treasures a permanent screaming reminder of Rome's relentless appetite. This place wasn't built for you. It was built to remind you how small you are. It's the stock exchange, the high court, a shopping mall, and a cathedral crammed into one open-air pressure cooker, and the heat is always on. You navigate by landmarks of commerce and justice. You pass the stalls selling exotic goods, spices that smell of faraway lands, colorful silks you could never afford, caged birds singing songs of forests they'll never see again. You see a man having a tooth pulled by a barber, his screams momentarily lost in the general din. You watch a scribe for hire, his fingers stained with ink, drafting a love letter for an illiterate soldier. Everything is for sale here: justice, prayer, love, and loyalty. You pause near the Temple of Vesta, where the eternal flame burns. You see the Vestal Virgins, walking in a silent, dignified procession, and for a moment, the crowd parts for them, a ripple of respect and fear. They are untouchable, sacred. They are everything you are not. You are the noise. They are the silence at its center. There's a commotion near the tabularium, the state archives. A tax farmer is being dragged away by the vigilas, accused of fraud. The crowd jeers, throwing rotten vegetables. They hate him not because he's a criminal, but because he's a criminal who got caught. Here, the only real sin is failure. Your gaze lingers for a moment, a mix of morbid curiosity and quiet satisfaction. It's a small, bitter pleasure to see someone more powerful than you fall. You have no business here. Not really. You are not here to sue or legislate or trade. You are here because to be Roman is to be seen in the Forum. It's to feel the pulse of the empire, to absorb the news, the gossip, the lies. You are a spectator in your own civilization, watching the grand, bloody play unfold. The sun climbs higher, beating down on the marble and the dust. The noise doesn't subside. It intensifies. The air grows thick, heavy with the smell of sacrificial smoke, roasting meat from nearby food stalls, and the unwashed ambitions of a million souls. The Forum has hollowed you out. Your stomach, a vacant cavern, echoes the city's chaos. It's time to eat. You leave the grand hypocrisy of the Forum behind, diving back into the narrow, winding streets. Lunch is not a meal. It's a mission. Your insula has no kitchen, and the thought of trying to start a fire in your tiny room is a death wish. So like half of Rome, you live at the mercy of the street vendors and their steaming, smoking, often questionable offerings. You follow your nose, which is not always a good idea in this city. The perfume of grilling sausage duels with the ghost of last week's fish guts from a blocked gutter. The sweet scent of honey cakes battles the acrid smell of urine in a nearby alley. You arrive at a thermopolium, the ancient equivalent of a fast food joint. It's a small, open-fronted stall with a large L-shaped counter made of brick. Set into the counter are several large earthenware jars, or dolia, holding hot food. The proprietor is a large man with a greasy apron and a single, wandering eye that seems to be inspecting your coin purse and the heavens simultaneously. Behind him, sausages of a suspiciously plump nature sizzle on a grill, spitting fat onto glowing coals. Flies, the unofficial mascots of Roman dining, buzz in lazy, happy circles. Your options are limited by your coins and your courage. There's pol mentum, a thick, porridge-like stew of beans and grain. It's cheap, it's filling, and it tastes like wet sadness. There are hard-boiled eggs sitting in a bowl of cloudy water. There's bread, a dense, chewy loaf that could double as a bludgeoning weapon. And then there's the prize, the sausage. It smells divine. It smells of fennel and garlic and roasting meat. It also smells like a gamble, a game of gut roulette. You've heard the stories. Sausages made with more breadcrumbs than meat, or with meat from animals that died of natural causes just this morning. You decide to risk it. You point. The vendor grunts, snatches a sausage from the grill with a pair of tongs that look like a surgical instrument from a nightmare, and slaps it onto a thick slice of bread. He shoves it at you. You hand over 2 of your precious bronze coins. He makes them disappear without even looking. The transaction is complete. Now, where to eat? There are no tables, no chairs. You find a relatively clean spot on the steps of a nearby temple, leaning your back against a cold stone column. You guard your lunch like a wolf, taking quick, furtive bites, your eyes scanning the street for beggars or opportunistic children. The first bite is a revelation. It's hot, greasy, and bursting with salt and spices. The bread is tough, and you have to tear at it with your teeth, but it serves as a perfect vessel for the river of fat dripping from the sausage. For a few glorious moments, you are not a client, not another faceless plebeian. You are just a man, eating a hot meal under the Roman sun. Then the second thoughts creep in. You notice the texture is a little gritty, and there's a strange, slightly sour aftertaste. Was that fennel or something else? You look at the final bite, sitting in your hand, suddenly an object of deep suspicion. You've seen men doubled over in agony in the streets, victims of a bad piece of pork. You've heard the whispers of the sausage sickness. You hesitate, but hunger wins. You finish the last bite, wiping the grease from your chin with the back of your hand. You stand up, your brief respite over, your stomach is full, but your mind is uneasy. The meal sits heavy, a warm, greasy ball of uncertainty. You've refueled your body, but you might have just poisoned it. That's the bargain of life in Rome. Every pleasure comes with a price, every comfort with a risk. You take a swig of wine from the small flask you carry, the sour liquid washing away the taste of garlic and regret. It doesn't help. Now, with a belly full of doubt and the afternoon stretching before you like a dusty, endless road, you have to get back to work, or rather, the search for it. The real grind is about to begin. The sausage sits in your stomach like a warm stone, a ticking clock of potential agony. You push the thought away. Worrying is a luxury, a pastime for men who own olive groves. You have the rest of the day to fill, and your patron's meager handout won't stretch to tomorrow. You need more work, and in Rome, work is a hunt. You become a shadow, slipping through the veins of the city, your ears open, your eyes sharp. You're looking for the subtle signs of opportunity. A construction site where a foreman is shouting about being short-handed, a merchant ship at the Emporium, its great belly disgorging amphorae that need to be carried to a warehouse, a scribe's office where a sudden rush of legal documents requires extra copyists. You drift towards the Field of Mars, the Campus Martius. It's a vast open space outside the old city walls, a chaotic sprawl of temples, public baths, and exercise grounds. This is where the city breathes, where soldiers drill, where chariot makers test their wheels, and where a man with strong back and no connections might find a few hours of brutal, honest labor. The air here smells different, less of sewage, more of dust, horse sweat, and the metallic tang of ambition. You pass a group of young aristocrats, stripped to the waist, wrestling under the afternoon sun, their bodies oiled and glistening. They move with the easy grace of men who have never known a day of real work, their laughter echoing across the field. They exist in a different universe. You walk on, past the magnificent bulk of the Pantheon, its great dome, a perfect, silent rebuke to the chaos at its feet. You're not here for architecture. You're here for the grunt work. You find what you're looking for near the river. A new bath complex is being built, a monument to some rich equestrian's ego. It's a hive of activity, a swarm of half-naked men, their bodies caked in dust and grime, move like ants under the watchful eye of a foreman. He stands on a pile of rubble, a stick in his hand, his face a permanent scowl. He looks like he was born angry. You approach him cautiously. You don't ask for a job. That's a sign of weakness. You stand nearby, looking capable, looking strong. You catch his eye. He sizes you up, his gaze sweeping over you from your worn sandals to your tense shoulders. He's judging your muscle, your stamina, your desperation. He sees enough of all three. He jerks his chin towards a pile of terracotta roof tiles. Move those to the west wing. Don't break any, or you'll pay for them with your skin. He doesn't ask your name. He doesn't care. You are now, for the next few hours, just another pair of arms. The work is mind-numbing, back-breaking. You heft a stack of tiles, the rough clay scraping your hands. They are heavier than they look. The sun is a merciless hammer. Sweat pours down your face, stinging your eyes. Dust fills your lungs, making each breath a gritty chore. You move in a rhythm of pain. Lift, carry, walk, stack, return, repeat. The world shrinks to the weight on your shoulders and the burning in your legs. You work alongside other men, a silent fraternity of exhaustion. There's no conversation, just the occasional grunt of effort. You see the foreman use his stick on a slave who dropped a tile, the sharp crack echoing across the site, followed by a choked cry. You keep your head down. You don't look, you just keep moving. This is the engine of Rome, not the Senate, not the legions. This, the anonymous, agonizing labor of a million men like you, building an empire that will never know their names. Suddenly, a shadow falls over you. You look up, blinking against the glare. It's not the foreman. It's a man in a clean tunic, holding a wax tablet, an administrator. He's followed by two men in uniforms, not soldiers, something else. The city watch, the vigilance. They aren't here to inspect the construction. They're looking for someone. Their eyes scan the faces of the workers. Cold, methodical. Your heart gives a single hard thump against your ribs. You've done nothing wrong. Not today, but in Rome, innocence is a technicality. It's a matter of who you know and who you've offended. The vigils stop in front of a man working a few feet away from you, a wiry bricklayer with a tattoo of a coiled snake on his arm. He freezes, a brick held halfway to the wall. Gaius Valerius? The administrator asks. His voice is calm, bureaucratic. It's the most terrifying sound in the world. The bricklayer doesn't answer. He just stares. One of the vigils steps forward and grabs his arm. There's no struggle, no protest, just a sudden, shocking surrender. The man's face is a blank mask of resignation, as if he's been expecting this moment his whole life. They lead him away. The foreman watches them go, then turns back to the rest of you. What are you looking at? Get back to work, he barks. The work resumes. The rhythm returns. But something has changed. The air is heavier. The sun feels colder. You glance at the spot where the bricklayer stood. A single brick lies in the dust. You don't know what he did. Maybe he was a thief. Maybe he was in debt. Maybe he told a joke about the emperor's wife. It doesn't matter. The law, in its majestic, impersonal cruelty, has touched your world. It's a reminder. You are not a citizen with rights. You are a resource, a number on a tablet, and you are utterly, terrifyingly replaceable. You heft another stack of tiles, the weight feeling heavier than before. It feels like the weight of the entire unforgiving city. The day bleeds into late afternoon. The foreman, satisfied with the mountain of tiles you've moved, dismisses you with a grunt and presses a few more coins into your palm. They're warm and slick with your own sweat. You've earned them. Every muscle in your body screams in protest. Your hands are raw. Your back is a single, solid knot of pain. But you have survived. You have earned your place in the city for one more night. You need to escape. Not just the work, but the noise, the pressure, the relentless forward motion of Rome. You wander, without conscious thought, towards the one place in the city that offers a different kind of energy. You find yourself standing before a temple, not one of the grand state-sponsored monoliths in the Forum, but a smaller, humbler sanctuary tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. Perhaps it's a temple to Mithras, hidden in a subterranean chamber, or a shrine to Isis, the Egyptian goddess whose cult has taken root in the city's immigrant quarters. You slip inside. The contrast is immediate, overwhelming. The roaring chaos of the street is replaced by a profound, echoing silence. The harsh sunlight gives way to a cool, scented darkness, lit only by the soft, flickering glow of oil lamps. The air is thick with the smell of old stone, incense, and something else, something ancient and still. It smells like peace. You are not a pious man. You perform the public rituals because you have to. You throw a pinch of grain on the altar of Jupiter because it's expected. But here, in the quiet dark, something shifts. This is not about the state. This is not about the emperor. This is personal. You see other people here, scattered in the shadows. A woman kneeling before a statue of the goddess, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. An old soldier, his face a roadmap of scars, lighting a small lamp, his lips moving in a silent prayer. They are not here for spectacle. They are here for solace. You find an empty corner and sink down onto the cold stone floor. You close your eyes. You don't pray with words. You don't know who to pray to. The gods of Rome are powerful and capricious, like senators with thunderbolts. They are landlords of the universe, demanding tribute. But here, in this borrowed silence, you feel the presence of something different. A god who might listen to the whispered fears of a single, insignificant man. You don't ask for wealth or power. You don't pray for glory. You pray for small things. For the leak in your roof to not get worse. For the sausage you ate at lunch to not betray you. For your child's cough to finally break. For the strength to face another morning salutation. You pray for the absence of disaster. In Rome, that is the most you can hope for. You sit there for a long time. The silence seeps into you, soothing the raw edges of your day. It doesn't solve your problems. It doesn't give you answers, but it gives you a moment of stillness in the heart of the storm. It allows you to feel the solid floor beneath you, to feel the slow, steady rhythm of your own breathing. It reminds you that beneath the grime and the fear and the exhaustion, you are still alive. You leave a single bronze coin, one you cannot afford to lose, in an offering bowl by the door. It's a tiny gesture, a foolish waste of money, but it feels necessary, an acknowledgement, a small payment for a moment of peace. You step back out into the fading light of evening. The city is still there, just as loud, just as demanding, but it seems a little farther away now. The noise is a little less piercing. You found a tiny pocket of stillness, a shield you can carry inside you. It won't last long, but for now it's enough. You have gathered yourself. You have found the strength to face the Roman night. The sun bleeds out of the sky, staining the clouds orange and purple. The city doesn't slow down. It changes its clothes. The respectable chaos of the day gives way to the illicit energy of the night. The shadows lengthen, swallowing alleys, transforming familiar streets into menacing corridors. This is the hour when another Rome awakens, a Rome of secrets, of pleasure, of danger, and you, with a few extra coins in your pouch and a day's worth of grime on your skin, are drawn towards it like a moth to a greasy, flickering flame. You head for a taberna, not a respectable wine shop where citizens discuss politics over a cup of decent Falernian. You're heading for a dive, a cellar, really. A hole in the ground marked only by a faded painting of a wine jug and the sound of muffled shouting leaking up through the floorboards. You descend a set of steep, treacherous stone steps into a low-ceilinged room, thick with smoke and the smell of spilled wine, unwashed bodies, and despair. The place is packed. Off-duty soldiers, disgruntled laborers, runaway slaves, and a few women with eyes as hard and ancient as the stones outside. They are all crammed onto rough wooden benches, hunched over crude tables scarred with knife marks and gambling scores. The only light comes from a few sputtering oil lamps that cast long, dancing shadows on the damp walls, making everyone look like a conspirator or a ghost. You find a space at a crowded table and slap a coin down. The owner, a man with a face like a collapsed building, brings you a clay cup of wine. It's the cheapest kind, sour and harsh, the color of rust, but it's strong. The first sip burns its way down your throat, a welcome fire that starts to melt the cold knot of anxiety in your chest. You're not here for the quality, you're here for the oblivion. Conversation here is not a polite exchange of ideas. It's a series of guttural barks and drunken pronouncements. A soldier with a fresh scar on his cheek is boasting about a skirmish on the German frontier. A dock worker is complaining about his foreman, his words slurring into a stream of curses. In the corner, a game of dice is underway. The rattle of the knuckle bones on the wooden table is a constant, hypnotic rhythm. Every few moments, a shout of triumph or a growl of disgust. You watch them for a while. The stakes are small, a few coins, but the players' faces are masks of intense concentration, as if the fate of the empire rests on the next throw. You drink your wine slowly, making it last. The alcohol begins to work its magic. The sharp edges of the day begin to blur. The pain in your back recedes to a dull ache. The faces around you seem less menacing, more familiar. They are all you. They are all chasing the same fleeting escape from the same relentless reality. You are comrades in exhaustion. A musician starts to play in the corner. A man with a battered lyre and a voice raw with cheap wine. He sings a song about a faithless lover and a broken heart. It's a sad, simple tune, but the whole room joins in on the chorus, their voices rough and out of tune. A beautiful, terrible choir of the forgotten. For a moment you feel a surge of something that feels almost like community, a shared sense of being at the bottom of the world, together. The second cup of wine goes down easier. The room starts to spin gently. The noise becomes a warm, buzzing hum. This is the danger zone. This is where a friendly conversation can turn into a knife fight over a perceived insult. This is where a man can lose a week's wages on a single roll of the dice. You've seen it happen 100 times. You see a flash of steel at the dice game. The owner wades in, a heavy club in his hand, and restores order with a few well-placed thuds. The game resumes as if nothing happened. You know you should leave. You have enough. You have found the temporary peace you were looking for. But the warmth of the wine and the pull of the shared misery are strong. It's easy to stay. It's easy to order another cup. It's easy to forget that tomorrow the sun will rise again and the entire grinding process will start over. The patron's door, the forum's roar, the foreman's stick, it's all waiting for you, just on the other side of this drunken haze. You push yourself to your feet. The room sways. You steady yourself against the table. You are a ghost again, leaving the world of the living dead. You climb the stairs, back into the cool night air. The street is dark, empty, and suddenly terrifying. Every dark doorway holds a potential mugger. Every distant shout is a potential threat. You pull your tunic tight and begin the long, lonely walk home, your head swimming, your heart heavy. You are drunk enough to feel brave and sober enough to be afraid. You have survived another day in Rome, and your only reward is the knowledge that you have to do it all over again. He arrived like a myth, a piece of a world so far removed from the shores of Japan that he might as well have fallen from a different sky. His name, the one history would give him, was Yasuke. But when he first stepped off the Jesuit mission ship in 1579, he was simply a presence, a towering shadow of a man, his skin the color of polished obsidian, his height eclipsing every man around him. To the people of Kyoto, who gathered in stunned, silent crowds to watch him pass, he was not a man, he was an event, a walking god, or perhaps a demon. They had never seen anything like him. He was the property of Alessandro Valignano, the formidable Jesuit missionary, whose ambition was to bring the word of his God to the land of the rising sun. Yasuke was his attendant, his bodyguard, a living, breathing testament to the vastness of the world that the Europeans claimed to represent. We don't know where he came from. The Horn of Africa, Mozambique, Ethiopia. The records are ghosts, whispers. What we know is the impact. In a society defined by its homogeneity, his very existence was a tear in the fabric of reality. People were crushed in the streets, climbing over one another just to get a glimpse of this dark giant. Doors were broken down, riots nearly erupted. He was a spectacle of flesh and bone. Valignano, ever the strategist, saw an opportunity. He was seeking an audience with the most powerful man in Japan, the warlord, who was in the process of tearing down the old world and forging a new one in fire and blood. Oda Nobunaga, the Demon King, a man of insatiable curiosity and terrifying ambition, a man who collected rare and beautiful things, priceless tea bowls, European armor, exotic animals. Valignano decided to present him with the rarest prize of all, a man from another continent. The journey to the capital was a procession of wonder and fear. Yasuke walked through a world of paper screens and manicured gardens, a world whose aesthetics were built on subtlety and restraint. And he was the opposite of all that. He was pure, undeniable presence. He learned to move with a quiet dignity, his eyes taking in everything, the intricate patterns on a samurai's kimono, the delicate art of a woman's bow, the cold, hard steel of a katana worn by a passing warrior. He was a silent observer in a world that could not stop staring at him. He was a foreigner, an outsider, a slave, but destiny, a force as strange and unpredictable as the man himself, was about to offer him a different path. He was on his way to meet a king, and that meeting would not just change his life, it would turn him into a legend. The air in the audience chamber crackled with a silent, dangerous energy. It smelled of aged wood, incense, and the cold, metallic scent of power. Yasuke stood motionless, a silent monolith in a room filled with the hushed rustle of silk. He was on his knees in the seiza position, a posture of submission that felt alien and agonizing to his long limbs. Before him, seated on a raised platform, was the man who held the fate of Japan in his hands, Oda Nobunaga. He was not a large man, but his presence filled the room, sucking the very air from it. His eyes, sharp and intelligent, missed nothing. They were the eyes of a hawk, capable of seeing both the grand sweep of a battlefield and the smallest flicker of fear in a subordinate's face. He looked at Yasuke, not with the gawking curiosity of the crowds, but with a focused, analytical intensity. He was not seeing a spectacle. He was solving a puzzle. Nobunaga spoke, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority that cut through the silence. He didn't believe it. He didn't believe that a man's skin could naturally be so dark. He thought it was ink, a clever trick by the foreign priests. He issued a command. He wanted the man scrubbed. A shocked silence fell over the room. Falai Nano protested, but Nobunaga's word was absolute. Servants scurried forward with buckets of water and rough cloths. Yasuke was forced to strip to the waist. His muscles, honed by a life of hardship, coiled under his dark skin like sleeping serpents. He submitted to the humiliation with a stoic, unnerving calm. The servants began to scrub, their hands moving tentatively at first. Then with more vigor, they scrubbed until his skin was raw. But the color remained. It was real. Nobunaga leaned forward, his eyes alight with a sudden, fierce fascination. He had seen something that defied his understanding of the world. This was not a trick. This was a man of incredible strength, and more importantly, incredible dignity. Yasuke had endured the ordeal without flinching, his gaze steady, his spirit unbroken. In that moment, Nobunaga saw not a slave, but a warrior. He peppered Valeriano with questions. Where did he come from? What was his story? How old was he? The answers were vague, fragmented, but Nobunaga was not interested in the past. He was interested in the present. He saw the potential. The sheer, raw power of this man was an asset, but it was his composure, his silent strength, that truly captivated the Demon King. In a court filled with scheming sycophants and ambitious vassals, Yasuke's stillness was a rare and valuable commodity. Nobunaga made a decision. A decision that would send shockwaves through the rigid, hierarchical society of feudal Japan. He wanted the man. He negotiated with Valeriano, offering gifts and favor in exchange. The Jesuit, seeing the immense political advantage of having the most powerful man in Japan in his debt, agreed. Yasuke was no longer the property of the church. He was now the property of Oda Nobunaga. But Nobunaga didn't treat him like property. He treated him like a discovery. He gave him a Japanese name, Yasuke. He began to teach him the language, delighting in his progress. He invited him to dine, a shocking breach of protocol that left his retainers speechless. He saw something in this outsider that he recognized in himself, a spirit that refused to be confined by the narrow definitions of the world. Nobunaga, the destroyer of traditions, had found a kindred soul in a man from the other side of the earth. Yasuke, the man who arrived in chains, was about to be reforged in the fires of a warlord's ambition. He was about to become a samurai. The transformation was not easy. It was a violent, painful rebirth. Yasuke was plunged into a world governed by a code of honor, so intricate and unforgiving that a single misspoken word or a misplaced glance could mean death. He had to learn not just a new language, but a new way of walking, of sitting, of breathing. He had to learn the silent language of the samurai. Nobunaga became his mentor, his patron, his master. He saw the process not just as training, but as an act of creation. He was shaping this raw clay into something extraordinary. He assigned tutors to teach Yasuke the complexities of the Japanese language. The sharp, guttural sounds felt strange on his tongue, but he learned with a fierce, quiet determination. He learned the honorifics, the subtle shifts in tone that conveyed respect, deference, or authority. His voice, once a silent void, began to find its place in this new world. Then came the art of war. He was naturally strong, but samurai combat was not about brute force. It was about discipline, precision, and a deep, almost spiritual connection to the blade. He trained in the dojo with Nobunaga's most trusted warriors. At first, they looked at him with a mixture of suspicion and contempt. He was an outsider, a gaijin. His size made him clumsy in their eyes. His movements unrefined. They tested him, their wooden swords striking with bruising force, expecting him to break. He did not break. He endured. He learned. He learned. He learned the footwork, the precise angles of a sword stroke, the art of using an opponent's momentum against them. His great height and long reach, once a disadvantage in the close quarters dance of Japanese swordsmanship, became a weapon. He learned to wield the katana, the soul of the samurai. The weight of the steel felt right in his hands, an extension of the warrior spirit that had been dormant within him. He was no longer just a strong man. He was becoming a weapon. Nobunaga, delighted by his progress, showered him with honors. He was granted the rank of samurai, a status that countless Japanese men lived and died for without ever attaining. He was given his own residence, a symbol of his place in Nobunaga's inner circle. He was given servants, and most importantly, he was given the right to wear the daisho, the two swords, the katana and the wakizashi, that were the undeniable symbol of his new identity. He became a fixture at Nobunaga's side. He was more than a bodyguard. He was a symbol of Nobunaga's power, a symbol of his willingness to shatter convention. When Nobunaga held court, Yasuke stood behind him, a silent, imposing figure, his dark skin a stark contrast to the colorful silks of the court. His presence was a silent warning to all who would challenge his master. He was the Demon King's shadow, a living piece of his legend. He learned the rhythms of the court, the endless tea ceremonies, the poetry contests, the political maneuvering that was as deadly as any battlefield. He learned to read the subtle cues in a courtier's smile, to sense the ambition behind a polite bow. He was an observer, a silent guardian, his loyalty absolute. He owed Nobunaga everything. The man had seen him, not as a beast or a curiosity, but as a human being. He had given him a name, a purpose, a home in this strange, violent land, surrounded by men who would never fully accept him. He had found his place. It was at the side of a tyrant, a visionary, a demon, and he would guard that place with his life. He was Yasuke, the Black Samurai, and his story was just beginning. Life became a series of gilded moments, each one more surreal than the last. Yasuke was no longer just a samurai in name. He was a living part of the Oda clan's machinery of power. His primary duty was simple yet profound: to exist at Nobunaga's side. He was the ultimate status symbol, a human treasure more valuable than any porcelain tea bowl or Portuguese musket. When Nobunaga rode out to inspect his armies, Yasuke rode with him, his imposing figure mounted on a powerful warhorse, a gift from the warlord himself. The other samurai, men from ancient noble families, would watch with a mixture of awe and simmering resentment. This outsider, this man with no past, no lineage, was closer to their lord than they would ever be. He was Nobunaga's weapon bearer, a position of immense trust. He was responsible for the lord's personal spear, a magnificent weapon that he learned to handle with deadly grace. In the grand processions that celebrated Nobunaga's victories, Yasuke would march near the front, a silent, dark-skinned giant in a sea of Japanese faces, a living banner of his master's unconventional and global ambition. He was proof that Nobunaga's power was not confined by the shores of Japan. It was a power that could reach across oceans and command the loyalty of men from worlds unknown. He learned the geography of power. He stood guard outside the sliding paper screens during secret meetings where the fates of rival clans were decided. He could not understand the intricate dance of politics, the webs of betrayal and alliance, but he could read the men. He saw the fear in the eyes of a defeated daimyo kneeling before his conqueror. He saw the avarice in the face of a merchant offering tribute, and he saw the unshakable, almost inhuman, confidence in the eyes of his master. Nobunaga moved through this world not as a participant, but as its architect. There were moments of strange intimacy. Nobunaga, a man of endless curiosity, would often summon Yasuke in the evenings. They would sit in the warlord's private chambers, sharing sake. Nobunaga would ask him about his homeland, about the animals, the stars, the gods of Africa. Yasuke's Japanese was still clumsy, a collection of fragments, but he would try to describe the vastness of the savannah, the heat of the sun, the roar of a lion. Nobunaga would listen, his gaze distant, as if he were trying to see those alien landscapes through Yasuke's eyes. In those moments, the gulf between lord and vassal, between Japanese and African, would seem to dissolve. They were just two men, two warriors, trying to make sense of a world that was too small for their spirits. He went to war. He was present at the inspections of the castles Nobunaga had conquered, standing on the battlements, looking out over lands that had been bought with an ocean of blood. While it's unlikely he was ever a field commander, he was a combatant, a warrior whose loyalty had been forged in the personal crucible of Nobunaga's favor. His role was to protect the body of his lord, a sacred duty. In the chaos of a skirmish or the tension of a siege, his sheer physical presence was a fortress. His size and strength made him a fearsome opponent, a human battering ram. He fought not for a nation or a flag, but for the one man who had looked at a slave and seen a samurai. He was a ghost in the machine, a man without a past living entirely in the present. The other retainers kept a respectful, cautious distance. They did not know what to make of him. He did not fit into their rigid social order. He was not family. He was not from a vassal clan. He was an anomaly. Some feared him, whispering that he was a demon, a tango, summoned by Nobunaga's dark arts. Others respected his quiet strength and his unwavering loyalty, but no one truly understood him. He was alone, surrounded by 1,000 allies and enemies. His only anchor in this strange floating world was the unwavering gaze of his master. For 3 years, he lived this dream, this impossible reality. He was a giant, walking in the shadow of an even greater giant. But shadows are fleeting, and the sun was about to set on the age of Nobunaga. The night of June 20th, 1582, was quiet, too quiet. Nobunaga was in Kyoto, staying at the temple of Hanzhou. He was at the peak of his power, on the verge of finally unifying all of Japan under his iron fist. He had with him only a small retinue of guards and attendants. His main armies were hundreds of miles away, mopping up the last pockets of resistance. He felt invincible. It was a fatal mistake. Yasuke was there, sleeping in a nearby chamber, his hand never far from the hilt of his sword. He was woken not by a warning, but by the sudden, terrifying sound of chaos. The splintering of wood, the shouts of men, the unmistakable, chilling sound of arrows thudding into the temple walls. And then the smell of smoke. The temple was surrounded. They were under attack. He grabbed his katana and burst out into the courtyard. The world had turned into a nightmare of fire and steel. The temple grounds were swarming with soldiers, their banners bearing the crest of the bellflower, the crest of Akechi Mitsuhide, one of Nobunaga's most trusted generals. It was a betrayal of the most intimate and vicious kind. There was no time for shock. There was only time for battle. Yasuke became a force of nature. He waded into the fray, his great height and strength turning him into a whirlwind of destruction. His katana, a blade forged in the fires of Japanese tradition, now wielded by a son of Africa, became an instrument of pure vengeance. He fought with the fury of a man defending not just his lord, but his entire world. The Akechi soldiers, momentarily stunned by the sight of this black-skinned demon charging at them from the flames, fell back before his onslaught. He fought his way towards Nobunaga's chambers. The temple was burning around them, the roar of the fire a deafening funeral pyre. He found his master, not panicked, but unnervingly calm, a bow in his hand, firing arrows at the attackers swarming the inner garden. Even in the face of certain death, Nobunaga was a warlord. He would not die cowering. They fought side by side, a lord and his most unlikely retainer, a small island of defiance against a tidal wave of treason. But they were hopelessly outnumbered. For every enemy they cut down, 3 more took his place. Nobunaga was wounded, an arrow in his shoulder. The end was near. He retreated into the inner chambers of the burning temple. He was not going to give his enemies the satisfaction of taking his head. He was going to perform seppuku, the ritual suicide of a samurai. His final moments are a blur of smoke and honor. According to some accounts, Nobunaga's last order was to Yasuke, "Do not let them get my head." It was the ultimate act of trust. The head of a defeated lord was the ultimate prize, a symbol of absolute victory. Nobunaga wanted to deny his traitorous vassal that final triumph. Yasuke understood. As the flames licked at the paper screens and the roof began to collapse, he stood guard. He watched his master perform the final, agonizing ritual, a page assisting with the final cut. Then the chamber was engulfed in flames. History loses sight of what happened next. Did Yasuke retrieve the head himself? Did he ensure the fire consumed it? We don't know. All we know is that Akechi Mitsuhide, for all his searching through the smoldering ruins of Honnoji, never found the head of Oda Nobunaga. The final wish of the Demon King had been granted. Yasuke survived the inferno. He fought his way out of the temple, a lone giant emerging from the ashes of a fallen kingdom. His master was dead. His world was gone. The dream was over. He had to find Nobunaga's son and heir, Oda Nobunaga, who was stationed nearby. Loyalty demanded it. He fought his way across the city, a man fueled by grief and a dying sense of duty, only to find another battle, another defeat. Nobunaga, surrounded and outnumbered, also chose suicide. In a single night, the Oda clan, the most powerful force in Japan, had been decapitated. Yasuke, the samurai with no past, now had no future. The fire at Honji consumed more than a temple. It consumed an era. When Yasuke emerged from the ashes, he was a relic, a living ghost of a dead dream. He was captured by Akechi's men. He was brought before the traitor, the man who had murdered his master. Akechi Mitsuhide, the new, temporary ruler of the ashes, looked at the black samurai and did not know what to do with him. What is the value of a warlord's treasure when the warlord is dead? What do you do with a living symbol whose meaning has been erased? Akechi's advisors debated. Some argued for his execution. He was, after all, a loyal retainer of Nobunaga. He was a warrior. Leaving him alive was a risk, but Akechi saw something else. He reportedly dismissed Yasuke with a stunning, almost casual statement. This man is not Japanese. He is a beast. He does not understand reason or honor. He is not worthy of death. It was a final, cruel humiliation. To be denied a warrior's death, to be dismissed as an animal, was a fate worse than beheading. Akechi sent him back to the Jesuits, the Nanbanji, the temple of the southern barbarians. He was returned to the men who had first brought him to Japan in chains. His journey had come full circle. He had risen to the heights of samurai society, only to be cast back down into the world of the outsiders. And then he vanishes. History loses his trail. The records fall silent. The Jesuits may have helped him leave Japan. He may have stayed, living out his days in the anonymity of the foreign missions in Nagasaki. He may have become a sailor, a mercenary, a ghost haunting the port cities of Asia. We simply do not know. His story ends not with a bang, not with a final, heroic death on the battlefield, but with a whisper. He walks off the stage of history and disappears into the fog. But legends are not bound by historical records. The story of the black samurai of the Oda clan refused to die. It became a folk tale, a whisper passed down through generations, a story of a giant who fought alongside the Demon King, a story that defied the rigid boundaries of race and caste. He became a symbol of the strange, brief, and violent period of Japanese history, when the country was open to the outside world, a time of muskets and missionaries, of warlords and wonders. He is a paradox. A man who achieved one of the highest honors in one of the world's most exclusive warrior cultures, yet whose name is a footnote in most official histories. He is a testament to the vision of Oda Nobunaga, a man who could see value where others saw only difference. And he is a testament to his own incredible resilience, his ability to adapt and survive in a world that was determined to misunderstand him. What became of him? Perhaps it is better that we do not know. His open-ended fate allows him to be whatever we need him to be, a symbol of loyalty, a story of the ultimate outsider, a forgotten hero. He exists now in that space between history and myth, a powerful, silent figure standing forever in the shadow of a burning temple. His name was Yasuke. He was a slave who became a samurai, and his silence, in the end, speaks louder than any sword. Before there were satellites, before there was the compass, before a man even dared to dream of sailing over the edge of the world, there was the map. But it wasn't a map as we know it. It wasn't a tool for getting from here to there. It was a story, a prayer, a desperate, beautiful attempt to impose human order on a terrifyingly chaotic universe. The first maps were not drawn to guide the feet. They were drawn to guide the soul. Picture it. Mesopotamia. 2,500 years ago. A scholar hunches over a clay tablet, no bigger than the palm of his hand. He isn't a cartographer. He's a theologian, a philosopher with a sharp stylus. He etches lines into the wet clay. He isn't drawing coastlines or trade routes. He is drawing the cosmos. This is the Babylonian map of the world, the Imago Mundi, and it is a masterpiece of sacred imagination. At its center is Babylon. Of course, for the man drawing it, Babylon is not just a city, it is the navel of the world, the axis around which everything else revolves. From this sacred center, two parallel lines run down the middle, the mighty Euphrates River, the lifeblood of his civilization. Around this heartland, he draws a circle. This is the Salt Sea, the bitter river, the boundary of the known world. It's a perfect, comforting, geometric shape. It says, here, within this circle, is order. Here is us. But what lies beyond? What exists in the terrifying, uncharted emptiness outside the circle of the known? This is where the map ceases to be geography and becomes mythology. The Babylonian scholar doesn't leave it blank. A blank space on a map is an admission of ignorance, and ignorance is a form of fear, so he fills it. He etches 7 or 8 triangles, radiating outwards from the bitter river, like rays of a spiky sun. These are the Nagu, the far-flung regions, places of mystery and legend. He gives them names that are not locations, but descriptions of a mythical reality. One is the land where the sun is not seen. Another is the place of the winged bird. A third is home to the Anzu bird, a monstrous lion-headed eagle that could steal the tablets of destiny from the gods. This isn't a map for a traveler. It's a warning. It's a bestiary. It's a story whispered around a fire. Beyond our perfect circle of civilization, it says, lies a world of monsters, of eternal darkness, of beings that can challenge the gods themselves. This tablet wasn't meant to be stuffed into a traveler's satchel. It was likely kept in a temple, a religious artifact, a visual representation of the Babylonian creation myth, the Enuma Elish. It was a way of understanding one's place in a universe that was vast, ancient, and largely hostile. The world was not a sphere of rock and water to be measured. It was a divine drama, and this map was its stage. It was an act of faith, etched in clay, a declaration that even in the face of an infinite and unknowable wilderness, man could draw a circle and call it home. It was the first, brave, and utterly human lie we ever told ourselves about the shape of our world. Then, something changed. The world tilted on its axis, not physically, but intellectually. The shift happened in the sun-drenched, argumentative cities of ancient Greece. Here, a new kind of mind was at work, a mind that was not content with stories, a mind that was obsessed with a radical, dangerous new idea: measurement. The Greeks looked at the same world as the Babylonians, the same sun, the same stars, the same sea, but they saw something different. They saw not a divine drama, but a system, a cosmos governed by laws that could be understood, quantified, and most audaciously of all, mapped. The revolution began not with an explorer, but with a philosopher. Men like Anaximander and Hecataeus of Miletus took the old Babylonian idea of a circular world, but they stripped it of its monsters. They tried to fill it with real places, based on the stories of sailors and merchants. Their maps were still crude, speculative discs with Greece at the center, naturally. But the intent was different. They were trying to create a rational model of the world, not a spiritual one. They were the first to ask not just where are we, but how big is it? And that question, that simple, audacious question, led to one of the most breathtaking intellectual achievements in human history. It happened in Alexandria, Egypt, the intellectual capital of the Hellenistic world. It was the work of a man named Eratosthenes. He was not a sailor or a soldier. He was a librarian, the head of the great library of Alexandria, the single greatest repository of knowledge in the ancient world, and he was a mathematician. Eratosthenes heard a fascinating report from the city of Syene in southern Egypt. He was told that on the day of the summer solstice, at high noon, the sun shone directly down into a deep well, illuminating its very bottom. This meant that the sun was perfectly, vertically overhead. At the same time, in Alexandria, hundreds of miles to the north, he observed that a vertical obelisk cast a distinct shadow. His mind, a finely tuned instrument of logic and geometry, saw the implication. If the earth were flat, the sun's rays would be parallel everywhere, and both the well in Syene and the obelisk in Alexandria would be shadowless. But they weren't. The only way to explain the shadow in Alexandria was if the surface of the earth was curved. And if it was curved, it had a circumference. And if it had a circumference, he could calculate it. It was a leap of pure, unadulterated genius. He didn't need a ship. He didn't need an army. He needed a stick, his brain, and a little bit of geometry he'd learned as a schoolboy. He measured the angle of the shadow cast by the obelisk in Alexandria. It was about 7.2 degrees, or about 1/50th of a full 360-degree circle. Now, all he needed was the distance between Alexandria and Syene. He couldn't measure it himself, so he hired a beamatist, a professional surveyor trained to measure distances by counting their steps. The distance, they reported, was about 5,000 stadia. The calculation was simple. If the distance between the two cities, which accounted for 1/50th of the Earth's curve, was 5,000 stadia, then the total circumference of the Earth must be 50 times that, 250,000 stadia. The exact length of the ancient Greek stadion is debated, but his calculation was astonishingly accurate. He was off by only a few percent. With a stick, a well, and the power of human reason, Eratosthenes had measured the entire planet. He had taken the world out of the hands of the gods and placed it into the realm of mathematics. He went on to draw a new map of the world, one based on this revolutionary idea. He was the first to overlay the known world with a grid of intersecting lines, the primitive ancestors of latitude and longitude. His map was still full of errors and vast, empty spaces. He knew only a fraction of the globe, but the principle was world-changing. The Earth was no longer a story to be told. It was a space to be measured, a puzzle to be solved. The monsters were beginning to retreat from the edges of the map, replaced by the cold, clean, and beautiful certainty of the line. The age of the scientific map had begun. The human mind, for the first time, had wrapped itself around the world. If the Greeks measured the world out of curiosity, the Romans measured it for one reason and one reason only: to conquer it. For Rome, a map was not a philosophical exercise or a scientific marvel. It was a tool, a weapon, a blueprint for domination. Roman maps were stripped of all poetry, all mythology, all unnecessary beauty. They were brutally, magnificently practical. They were the physical embodiment of the Roman mind, organized, relentless, and utterly focused on the task at hand. The greatest surviving example of this mindset is not a map you would recognize today. It's the Tabula Peutingeriana, the Peutinger Table. It's a bizarre, fascinating, and utterly Roman document. It's a parchment scroll, nearly 22 feet long, but only about a foot high. It depicts the entire known world, from Britain to India. But the world is not shown as it actually is. It is grotesquely distorted, stretched and flattened, as if it had been run over by a chariot. Britain is a sideways sliver. Italy is a long, horizontal spear. The Mediterranean is a narrow, meandering river. A modern cartographer would call it a disaster. A geographer would laugh. But the Roman who used it wouldn't have cared, because this map was not designed to show what the world looked like. It was designed to show how to get from one end of it to the other. It is, in essence, a subway map for the Roman Empire. The focus is not on coastlines or geographical features. The focus is on the roads, the legendary Roman roads, Those marvels of engineering that stitch the empire together are depicted as straight, bold, red lines. They are the arteries of the map, the only thing that truly matters. Along these lines, every major city and town is marked with a small icon, a little drawing of a building, or two towers for a major city like Rome, Constantinople, or Antioch. And between each stop, a number is written, indicating the distance in Roman miles. That's it. That's all the information a Roman traveler, a soldier, a bureaucrat, a merchant needed to know. Where am I? Where am I going? And how long will it take me to get there? The map is a masterpiece of information design, prioritizing function over form with a ruthlessness that is breathtaking. It doesn't show mountains or deserts as geographical features, but it might show a spa, a temple, or a mountain pass, because those are things a traveler would need to know about. It ignores the true shape of the land in favor of the human network that has been imposed upon it. This map is a declaration of power. It says that the natural world, the mountains, the oceans, the forests, is irrelevant. What matters is the Roman world, the world of roads and cities and legions. The map doesn't adapt to the world. It forces the world to adapt to the map. It is a visualization of the Roman will, a testament to their belief that any place worth going to was a place connected by a Roman road. If a place wasn't on the map, it might as well not exist. This was the map of an administrator, not an explorer. It was a tool for managing an empire. With a map like this, the emperor could calculate how long it would take to move a legion from Gaul to Syria. A tax collector could plan his route through the provinces. A courier could deliver a message from Rome to Alexandria with predictable efficiency. It was the nervous system of the empire, laid out on parchment. The Romans had more geographically accurate maps, inherited from the Greeks. They knew the world was a sphere. Their military surveyors created detailed local maps for campaigns. But the soul of the Roman map is in the Peutinger table. It is the map of a civilization that had stopped exploring the unknown and was focused on controlling the known. There are no monsters at the edges of this map. There is no sense of wonder. There is only the relentless humming efficiency of the imperial machine. The road is everything, and all roads, as the map makes visually, irrefutably clear, lead to Rome. But even as Rome's engineers were paving the world into submission, a lone genius was working in the quiet, dusty halls of the Alexandrian library, creating a map so advanced, so conceptually revolutionary, that it would haunt the imagination of the Western world for the next 1400 years. His name was Claudius Ptolemy. He was a Greek astronomer, a mathematician, a geographer, and he was not a man of his time. He was a man who belonged to the future. Ptolemy looked at the maps that came before him, the pragmatic road maps of the Romans, the speculative discs of the early Greeks, and he saw them for what they were, imperfect. They were approximations, sketches, useful lies. He wanted to create something different, something definitive. He wanted to create a map of the entire world, not as a story, not as a tool for marching legions, but as a perfect, rational, mathematical model. He wanted to create a mirror of the world. His magnum opus, the Geographia, was not a map itself. It was a set of instructions. It was a recipe for drawing the world. It was a monumental, 8-volume treatise that laid out his entire system, and at its heart was an idea that he inherited from Eratosthenes and perfected the grid. He took the primitive idea of intersecting lines and refined it into the system of latitude and longitude that we still use today. He was the first to project the curved surface of the spherical Earth onto a flat, two-dimensional sheet of paper using rigorous mathematical principles. He understood that you couldn't do it without distortion. and he invented different map projections to try and minimize it. He was an obsessive, a data hoarder. He scoured the Alexandria Library, the greatest collection of knowledge in the ancient world, for every scrap of information he could find. He read the accounts of sailors, the logs of merchants, the reports of military surveyors. He tried to gather the precise coordinates for every significant city, mountain, and river mouth in the known world. He compiled a list of over 8,000 places, each with its own latitude and longitude. It was an act of breathtaking intellectual ambition. He was trying to create the world's first geographic database. Of course, he made mistakes. Huge, magnificent, world-changing mistakes. His data was often flawed. The travelers' accounts he relied on were full of exaggerations and inaccuracies, and he made one crucial, fundamental error in his calculations. He followed the calculations of another astronomer, Posidonius, who had underestimated the circumference of the Earth. Ptolemy's world was significantly smaller than the real one, about 30% too small. This error had a colossal consequence. On his map, the landmass of Eurasia stretched much farther east than it should. The vast, empty space of the Pacific Ocean was compressed into a manageable, almost inviting sea. He had, on paper, shrunk the planet. For centuries, his work was largely forgotten in Europe, preserved only by Arab scholars. But when the Geographia was rediscovered and translated into Latin in the 15th century, it landed like a thunderbolt. It was a revelation. It provided the explorers of the Renaissance with a complete, scientific, and seemingly authoritative map of the entire world. And it was this map, Ptolemy's brilliant, flawed masterpiece, that Christopher Columbus carried in his head and possibly in his hands. When he set sail from Spain, he was looking at Ptolemy's shrunken world, at the vast eastward stretching coast of Asia, and he made a simple, fatal calculation. He believed he could reach the spices of the East by sailing west. He thought it was a manageable journey. He had no idea that a continent and an entire ocean, conveniently omitted by Ptolemy's error, lay in his way. Ptolemy's ghost was at the helm of the Santa Maria, the ghost of a second-century Alexandrian librarian, a man who had never left the shores of the Mediterranean, had just discovered America. He had drawn a map so powerful that the world itself had no choice but to conform to it. But for every line drawn on a map, there is an edge, a boundary where the known world frays into the unknown. For the ancient cartographers, these blank spaces were a source of deep anxiety and wild, unbridled imagination. They were a canvas for their deepest fears and their most profound hopes. These were the places where science ended and art, myth, and terror began. This was the world of Here Be Dragons. The phrase itself, Hic sunt dracones, is a modern myth found on only one historical globe. But the sentiment was everywhere. The edges of the map were a menagerie of the monstrous and the marvelous. Ptolemy himself, for all his scientific rigor, populated the distant lands of Africa and Asia with strange and fantastical peoples. He wrote of the cynocephali, the dog-headed men, the cyopode, men with a single giant foot that they used to shade themselves from the sun, the blemmies, headless men with their faces in their chests. These weren't just whimsical fantasies. They were a way of conceptualizing the other, a way of defining the boundaries of humanity. We, the people in the center of the map, are normal, civilized. They, the people on the fringes, are monstrous, subhuman, a grotesque parody of ourselves. The monsters on the map were a visual representation of cultural and geographical distance. The farther you got from home, the stranger and more dangerous things became. The oceans, in particular, were a realm of terror. Roman and Greek sailors, who rarely ventured out of the sight of land, filled the Atlantic with horrors. Pliny the Elder wrote of sea serpents of colossal size, of giant ship-sinking krakens, of whirlpools that could swallow the entire sea. The mapmakers visualized these fears. They drew churning waves, monstrous fish with gaping maws, and the seductive, deadly figures of sirens luring sailors to their doom. The sea was not an empty space to be crossed. It was an active, malevolent entity, a monster in its own right. But the unknown was not just a place of fear. It was also a place of wonder, a place of hope. The blank spaces on the map were also home to the legendary kingdoms and lost paradises that haunted the ancient imagination. Somewhere to the east, beyond the deserts of Persia, lay the kingdom of Prester John, a mythical Christian king of immense wealth and piety. Somewhere in the south, beyond the burning sands of Africa, were the golden cities of Ophir, and far to the west, across the endless ocean, lay the Fortunate Isles, the Isles of the Blessed, a paradise where the heroes of old lived in eternal spring. These places were a cartographic dream. They were a promise that beyond the hardship and brutality of the known world, there was a better place, a place of wealth, of peace, of eternal life. They were the reason to explore. They were the hope that fueled the dangerous voyages into the unknown. The map was a document of both terror and desire. It showed you the monsters you had to slay, and the treasures you might find if you were brave enough to face them. This act of filling the void was a profound psychological necessity. A blank map is an uncomfortable thing. It is a question without an answer. By filling the edges with dragons and dog-headed men, with utopian kingdoms and whirlpools, the ancient cartographers were doing something deeply human. They were taming the unknown by giving it a name and a face. They were turning their fear into a story. They were asserting a form of intellectual control over a world that was still, in so many ways, beyond their grasp. The dragons on the map were not a failure of geography. They were a triumph of the human imagination. But what happens when the knowledge is not imagined, but lost? What happens when the maps are not filled with dragons, but with fire? The story of ancient cartography is not just a story of brilliant discovery. It is also a story of catastrophic loss. It is a story that culminates in the smoke and embers of a dying library, a reminder of the terrifying fragility of human knowledge. The heart of the ancient intellectual world was the great library of Alexandria. It was more than a collection of scrolls. It was a living, breathing organism of human thought. For centuries, it was the place where the greatest minds of the Mediterranean world came to study, to argue, to collaborate. It was here that Eratosthenes measured the world. It was here that Ptolemy tried to map it. The library's shelves groaned with hundreds of thousands of scrolls, treatises on mathematics, astronomy, medicine, philosophy, and most precious of all, it held the greatest collection of geographical knowledge ever assembled. It contained the detailed logs of Phoenician and Carthaginian sailors who had circumnavigated Africa. It held the military survey maps of Alexander the Great's campaigns, which had stretched to the borders of India. It held countless local maps, regional surveys, and astronomical charts, a vast interconnected database of the known world. It was the planet's memory, inscribed on papyrus. And then it burned. The destruction was not a single dramatic event, as Hollywood would have us believe. It was a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts, stretching over centuries. It began with Julius Caesar, whose fire in the Alexandrian harbor during his civil war may have accidentally spread to the library's warehouses. It continued with the religious purges of Christian emperors, who saw the library's pagan knowledge as a threat. It culminated in the final violent destruction during the wars that racked the city in the late Roman period. With every fire, with every riot, a piece of the world was erased. A coastline drawn by a forgotten sailor vanished. A calculation of a star's position made by an anonymous astronomer turned to ash. The knowledge was not just lost, it was unknown. Future generations would have no idea that it had ever existed. The consequences were profound. It was a lobotomy performed on the brain of civilization. The intricate, nuanced world of Eratosthenes and Ptolemy was replaced in Europe by a cruder, more primitive vision. The Mappi Mundi of the early Middle Ages were a step backwards into myth. They were flat, circular, and centered on Jerusalem, more concerned with theology than geography. Africa, Asia, and Europe were crudely arranged in a TO shape, a visual representation of the Trinity. The scientific achievements of the Greeks were gone, buried under 1,000 years of dogma and ignorance. Humanity had to start over. Explorers in the age of discovery were not building on the knowledge of the ancients. They were painfully, clumsily rediscovering it. They had to remap the coast of Africa, a feat the Phoenicians had accomplished 2,000 years earlier. They had to recalculate the size of the earth. They were sailing into a world that had been mapped before, but the maps had been burned. It is impossible to know what we lost in the fires of Alexandria, what detailed knowledge of the Americas, of the Far East, of the interior of Africa might have been contained in those scrolls. How different would our history be if that knowledge had survived? Would the Dark Ages have been so dark? Would the age of discovery have been an age of rediscovery? We will never know. The smoke that rose from the burning library of Alexandria cast a long shadow over the future of human exploration. It is a haunting, permanent reminder that knowledge is not a permanent acquisition. It is a fragile, precious thing, easily created and even more easily destroyed. The greatest blank space on the map is not the unknown territory at its edge. It is the vast, silent void of all the things we once knew and have since forgotten. My life began with a sound, not a cry of birth, but the sharp, percussive crack of an axe biting deep into wood. It was the sound of my first death and my first awakening. Before that, I was just a tree, an oak, ancient and silent, one of 1,000 brothers standing sentinel in the dark, cold forests of Scandinavia. I knew only the slow, patient rhythm of the seasons, the weight of winter's snow on my branches, the tentative green blush of spring, the long, sun-drenched days of summer, the glorious dying fire of autumn. I was a part of the earth, my roots a tangled, secret conversation with the soil, my crown a silent communion with the wind and the stars. I was eternal. I was asleep. Then they came. They moved through the forest, not with the careless tread of hunters, but with the focused, reverent purpose of priests. They were the shipbuilders. They did not see a forest. They saw a fleet in waiting. They were looking for souls, for the spirits of the trees that would become the spirits of their ships. The one who chose me was old, his face a roadmap of sea wrinkles and wood scars, his eyes the pale, faded blue of a winter sky. He walked around me 3 times, his hand resting on my rough bark. He was not just looking at me. He was listening. He was listening to the silent story of my grain, to the memory of 100 years of wind I had resisted. He was searching for the strength, the resilience, the hidden life within the wood. He was looking for a warrior. He found it. He made a small mark at my base with his knife. It was a covenant, a promise. The next day they returned with their axes. The first blow was a shock, a violation, a searing pain that shot up my trunk from my roots to my highest leaves. I, who had stood against a century of storms, was being brought down by these small, soft-skinned creatures. The blows fell in a steady, relentless rhythm. It was not an act of hate. It was an act of creation, a brutal, violent birth, with a final groaning shriek of tearing wood. I fell. My world, once a vertical column of green reaching for the sky, became a horizontal, dizzying rush of earth and leaves. I lay on the forest floor, my connection to the earth severed, my long sleep over. The sky, once a distant canopy, was now a vast, terrifying open wound above me. I was no longer a tree. I was becoming something else. I was timber. I was a dream, waiting to be carved into the shape of a nightmare. The journey from the forest to the ford was a brutal awakening. I was stripped of my branches, my bark peeled away like a shedding skin, leaving my pale, naked wood exposed to the air for the first time. I was no longer an individual, a proud oak. I was a log, one of many, dragged by sweating oxen and cursing men over the rough, unforgiving ground. I was dragged out of the deep, silent green of the forest and into the harsh, open light of the settlement. The shipyard was not a place. It was a symphony of controlled violence. It was a cacophony of sound, the rhythmic thud of mallets, the high-pitched shriek of an adze shaping wood, the roar of the forge where iron rivets were being heated to a glowing orange, the shouts of men speaking a language of measurement and stress, of grain and curve. The air was thick with the smell of sawdust, of hot iron, of pine tar, and of the nearby sea. A salty, promising tang that was entirely new to me. I was laid upon a keel, a long, elegant spine of a beast that was not yet born. This was my new earth, my new anchor. The old shipbuilder, the one who had chosen me, became my god. His hands, though rough and calloused, moved with the delicate precision of a surgeon. He and his apprentices began to shape me. They were not just cutting wood, they were releasing the form that was already hidden within. I was to be the strakes, the overlapping planks that would form the hull. They split me along my grain, not against it, honoring the strength that had been my birthright. They used wedges and mallets, working with the wood, not fighting it. Each plank was hewn into a long, thin, impossibly elegant curve. They soaked me in water, then bent me slowly over a low fire, the heat and steam making me pliable, willing. I was being taught a new kind of resilience, not the rigid strength of a tree, but the flexible, yielding strength of a wave. They laid me against the curved ribs of the emerging ship, one plank overlapping the next in the clinker style. This was the secret to my future life. This overlapping skin would allow me to flex, to move with the water, to breathe with the ocean. I would not be a rigid box, plowing through the sea. I would be a part of it. Then came the joining. The forge roared to life. Boys worked the bellows, their faces ruddy in the glowing light. The blacksmith pulled a red-hot iron rivet from the coals. 2 men, one inside the hull, one outside, worked in a seamless, practiced rhythm. The hot rivet was pushed through a hole, drilled in the overlapping planks. The man inside placed a heavy iron plate, a rove over the end. The man outside, with a heavy hammer, beat the other end of the rivet, mushrooming it flat. Thud, thud. It was a sound that sealed my fate. I was being stitched together with iron and fire. Each rivet was a point of pain, a violation, but also a point of connection, of strength. I was becoming a single, unified being. My many parts, the keel, the ribs, the strakes, bound together into an unbreakable whole. They sealed my seams. They caulked the gaps between my planks with animal hair, wool, and fur soaked in sticky black pine tar. The smell was overpowering, acrid, medicinal. It was the scent of my new skin, a skin that would be impervious to the relentless, seeping hunger of the sea. I was being made waterproof, being made ready for an element that was my natural enemy. And finally, they gave me my face. The prow from a massive block of wood. The carvers began to release a monster. It was a dragon, its head reared up, its mouth open in a silent, eternal roar. Its eyes were wide with a terrible, hypnotic fury. Its neck was carved with the intricate, swirling knots and braids that were the signature of these people's art. This was not mere decoration. This was my soul. This was the face I would show to the world. A face of terror, of power, of untamed, savage beauty. I was a drakkar, a dragon ship. I was no longer a tree that reached for the sky. I was a beast that would devour the sea. I was complete. I was a weapon. I was a promise, and I was waiting, trembling with a strange new energy for the taste of salt. The day of my launch was a day of ritual and celebration. The entire village gathered at the water's edge. The air was festive, but thick, with an undercurrent of deep, primal superstition. I was more than a boat. I was a vessel of the community's hopes, its ambitions, its very survival. My fate was their fate. I sat on the slipway, a series of logs greased with animal fat, pointing towards the dark, cold water of the fjord. I felt the sun on my newly tarred skin. I could feel the nervous energy of the crowd, a low hum of anticipation. Priests, their faces grim, walked around me, chanting, sprinkling me with the blood of a sacrifice goat. The blood, dark and warm, ran in rivulets down my dragon prow. It was a consecration, an offering to the gods of the sea, to Njörður, who governed the winds, and to Ægir, the unpredictable, often cruel, old man of the ocean. They were begging the gods to accept me, to not swallow me whole in their watery rage. Then, the moment came. The shipbuilder, my creator, stood at my prow and gave a great shout. It was a signal. With a collective grunt, the men of the village put their shoulders to my stern. The ropes, holding me in place, were cut. I began to move. It was a slow, groaning, scraping sensation at first. I was sliding over the greased logs, leaving the familiar solid world of the land behind. The movement was alien, terrifying. I was an object, inert, being pushed towards an unknown fate. The crowd cheered, a great roar of encouragement and hope. Their sound washed over me. I was their child, their creation, being sent out into the wild. Then I hit the water. It was a shock, a sudden, breathtaking cold that enveloped my hull. For a moment, there was a lurch, a terrifying instability. I dipped, and for a heart-stopping second, I thought I would keep going, that the sea would claim me instantly. But then, the water found me. The elegant, calculated curves of my hull did their work. I rose. I settled. I found my balance. And then I was floating. The sensation was unlike anything I had ever known. I was no longer a dead weight. I was alive. I was buoyant. I was held, rocked gently in the cold green embrace of the fjord. The water, which I had been built to resist, was now my partner. It was supporting me, lifting me. I was no longer a thing of the land. I was a creature of the sea. The men scrambled aboard, their feet thudding on my deck planks. They were light, insignificant weights compared to the immense living pressure of the water beneath me. They ran to the mast, a great pine that had been my brother in the forest. With shouts and straining muscles, they raised it. A huge, square sail of dyed wool, blood red, was unfurled. The wind, my oldest friend from my life as a tree, found me again. But this time, it was different. It didn't just rustle my leaves, it filled my sail. It pushed. The sail bellied out with a great whoomph, like a lung taking its first breath, and I began to move under my own power. It was a feeling of pure, unadulterated ecstasy. I was gliding. I was flying. I was moving through the water with a silent, effortless grace. My dragon prow cut through the surface, creating two perfect, peeling waves on either side of me. I could feel the deep, powerful currents of the fjord speaking to my keel. I could feel the subtle shifts in the wind on my sail. I was an instrument, perfectly tuned to the forces of nature. The men on board began to cheer, a raw, triumphant sound that echoed off the steep, dark walls of the fjord. They were no longer just men. They were a crew, and I was no longer just a ship. I was their vessel, their partner, their beast. We were a single entity of wood, iron, flesh, and wind, moving with a singular, hungry purpose. I was born of the forest, forged by fire, and baptized in the cold, salt sea. My name would be whispered in fear in the churches of England and chanted in triumph in the halls of my homeland. My life had truly begun, and I was thirsty for the open ocean. My life became a rhythm, an endless savage beat, played out on the drum of the North Sea. I was a creature of two worlds, and a master of none. I knew the unpeaceful, sun-dappled silence of a hidden Scandinavian fjord, my hull reflecting the towering pines, the water around me as still and as green as glass. And I knew the gray, churning chaos of the open ocean, a relentless, heaving wilderness of water that stretched to a horizon that promised everything and nothing. My voyages were not journeys. They were raids. We were the wolves of the sea. We would leave our homes under the cover of the spring thaw, a pack of hungry, hopeful beasts. The first days were a ritual of rediscovery. The crew, soft from a long winter, spent huddled around fires, would find their sea legs again. Their hands, accustomed to carving wood or mending nets, would callous over from the rough, salt-stiffened ropes. They would learn my moods again, how I responded to the wind, how I shuddered when a large wave broke over my bow, how I sang when the wind was just right and I was flying over the water. My deck was their world. It was their home, their barracks, their dining hall, their temple. It was a small, cramped, chaotic space, perpetually damp, smelling of tar, of salt, of unwashed men, and of the faint, lingering metallic tang of old fear and old blood. They slept in leather sleeping bags, huddled together for warmth against the bitter ocean wind. They ate dried fish and hard, tasteless bread, washed down with ale that was often as salty as the sea itself. There was no privacy. There was no comfort. There was only the crew, the ship, and the vast, indifferent ocean. And then, after days or weeks of this monotonous gray purgatory, we would see it. Land, not the familiar, mountainous coast of home, but a low, green, gentle shoreline. England, or Francia. It was a sight that transformed the men. A switch would flip. The bored, weary sailors would become hunters. Their eyes would sharpen. They would check the edges of their axes, the points of their spears. A low, excited murmur would run through the crew. They were no longer just men. They were Vikings. My moment of transformation came then too. They would lower my gentle red sail, the sail of a traveler, and they would begin to row. The oars would slide out through the oar ports, long, elegant ash limbs. The men would find their rhythm, slow, powerful, hypnotic beat. I was no longer a creature of the wind. I was a creature of muscle and will. I would glide towards the shore, silent, low in the water, my dragon prow a serpent's head emerging from the mist of dawn. I was no longer a ship. I was a predator. We would strike at the places that were soft, unsuspecting, rich, the monasteries. To the men on my deck, they were not places of God. They were treasure houses, built by a strange, weak God who could not protect his own wealth. We would run aground on a sandy beach or up a shallow river. The men would pour over my sides with a great, terrifying roar, a sound that was part animal, part storm. They were a force of nature, unleashed. I would wait, rocking gently in the surf, a silent witness to the chaos. I would hear the screams, the splintering of wood, the clash of steel, and then they would return, their faces flushed with the savage joy of battle, their axes dripping. They would carry their plunder, silver chalices, golden crucifixes, jewel-encrusted books, whose words they could not read, but whose value they understood perfectly. They would also bring slaves, terrified, weeping monks and nuns, their soft, sheltered lives shattered in a single brutal hour. They would pile the treasure onto my deck. The sacred objects would be tossed carelessly among the coils of rope and the barrels of fish. The slaves would be herded into the small, cramped space in my stern. Then the men would push me back out into the sea, rowing hard, leaving behind a scene of smoldering ruins and unimaginable grief. As we pulled away from the shore, I would be heavier with gold, with silver, with the weight of shattered lives. My dragon prow, pointed back towards the gray horizon, would seem to be smiling. But it was not all blood and fire. I was a tool, and a tool can be used for more than just breaking things. I was also a merchant ship, a vessel of connection. I knew the bustling, cosmopolitan markets of Hidabi and Burka. There, my deck, once stained with the blood of monks, would be piled high with the peaceful bounty of the north. Walrus ivory, lustrous furs from the deep forests, amber that glowed like trapped sunlight. The men who had been savage warriors a month before would become shrewd, calculating traders, haggling in a dozen different languages with merchants from as far away as the Caliphate of Baghdad. I sailed south. I navigated the great rivers of the Rus, a grueling journey that required the crew to haul my entire weight overland on log rollers to bypass impassable rapids. I was a sea serpent, slithering through the heart of a continent, and I reached the greatest city in the world, Miklagard, Constantinople. To a creature born of the dark forests of the north, it was a city of impossible light, domes of gold that blazed in the sun, walls of marble, streets teeming with 1,000,000 people from every corner of the earth. My crew, the fierce, proud men of the north, were struck dumb with awe. They were country boys in the heart of civilization. They served as mercenaries for the Byzantine emperor, the legendary Varangian Guard, trading their loyalty and their battle fury for a fortune in gold coins. I would wait for them in the Golden Horn, my simple, savage beauty, a stark contrast to the elegant, sophisticated ships of the Byzantines. I was a barbarian at the gates of paradise, and then, laden with silks, spices, and Byzantine gold, we would make the long, arduous journey home. I had carried my crew through storms, through battles, through the markets of the world. I had been their home, their fortress, their treasure chest. I had kept them safe. I was a good ship. I had fulfilled my purpose. The years began to wear on me. My voyages became less frequent. The journeys were shorter, closer to home. My timbers, once young and supple, grew stiff. My hull, once smooth and sleek, was a tapestry of scars. I bore the marks of every rock I had scraped, every enemy arrow that had thudded into my side, every storm I had weathered. The sea itself was beginning to claim me, the relentless salt water seeping into my very bones. My crew aged with me. The young, reckless warriors who had first sailed on me were now gray-bearded elders. Their bodies stooped, their hands gnarled. They were replaced by their sons, and then their grandsons. I became a legend, a venerable old warrior dreaming of past glories. The Sea Dragon, they called me. The ship that had sacked Lindisfarne, the ship that had seen the golden domes of Miklagard. My final captain was the grandson of the man who had first commanded me. He was a great chieftain, a man respected for his wisdom as much as his strength in battle. He loved me. He treated me not as a tool, but as an ancestor. He would sit on my deck in the quiet evenings, in the ford, his hand resting on my gunwale, as if he were listening to the stories trapped in my wood. One day, he gave the order. I was to be dragged ashore. It was a slow, painful process. I, who had flown over the waves, was now being hauled over the rough ground by 100 straining men. The scraping of my keel on the rocks was an agony. It was the sound of my life ending. They pulled me into a clearing, a short distance from the water's edge. My final voyage was over. My final harbor had been reached. I was old. I was tired. I was leaking. My dragon prow, once so fearsome, now seemed to sag with a weary sadness. My work was done, but my purpose was not yet complete. I had one last duty to perform. I was not to be left to rot on the beach. I was not to be broken up for firewood. I was to be given an honor that was reserved only for the greatest of ships and the greatest of chieftains. I was to become a grave. He died in the winter, the old chieftain, my last captain. He died in his bed, peacefully, which was a rare and blessed thing for a man of his world. The days that followed were a blur of solemn, sacred activity, all centered around me. I was being prepared for my final transformation. I was no longer a vessel for the living. I was to become a vessel for the dead. They treated me with a reverence that bordered on worship. They scrubbed my decks, not to clean them, but to purify them. They polished my scarred wood. They draped my gunwales with richly embroidered cloths. I was being dressed for a wedding between my master and the eternity he was about to enter. They brought him to me. He was carried on a bier by his most loyal warriors. He was dressed in his finest clothes, a tunic of Byzantine silk, a cloak trimmed with the fur of a white wolf. His great silver-inlaid sword was placed in his hand. His helmet, with its intimidating iron face guard, was placed on his head. He looked not like a dead man, but like a king, sleeping. They laid him on a bed that had been built for him in the center of my deck, the place where he had stood so many times, his hand on the steering oar, his eyes on the horizon. They surrounded him with his treasures, the tools he would need for his journey to the next world, his shield, his axe, his favorite drinking horn, chests filled with the gold and silver he had won in a lifetime of raiding and trading. But they did not just bury him with his wealth. They buried him with his life. They sacrificed his favorite horse, its magnificent head placed near his feet, so he would have a steed to ride in Valhalla. They sacrificed his hunting dogs, so he would not be lonely. And in a final, terrible act of devotion, they sacrificed one of his slave girls, a young woman from Ireland, captured in a raid years ago. She was to accompany her master into the darkness, to serve him in death as she had in life. Her body was placed at his side. My deck was now a tableau of a life, a king surrounded by his power, his past, and his possessions. I was the container for his entire existence. I was his ark. Then they began to build the mound. Hundreds of people, men, women, and children, worked for days. They brought stones from the riverbed and earth from the fields. They built a great cairn of stones over me. First, a protective skeleton, and then they began to cover me with earth. It started as a gentle shower of soil on my deck, but it quickly became a torrent, a river of dirt. The light began to fade. The sounds of the living world, the shouts of the workers, the cries of the gulls grew muffled, distant. The earth piled up against my sides, the pressure immense. I was being returned to the element from which I had been born. I was becoming a part of the land again. The darkness was absolute. The silence was complete. It was the silence of the deep earth, the silence of the tomb. I held my captain and his life within my hull. I was his final fortress, protecting him from the ravages of time. We were locked together in a timeless embrace. I was no longer a ship designed to move through space. I was a vessel designed to move through time. My journey was not over. It was just beginning. I was sailing now on a different ocean, a dark, silent ocean of soil and memory. My destination was not a foreign shore, but an eternal one. I was carrying the soul of a Viking chieftain on his final voyage, a voyage to the halls of his gods, a voyage to Valhalla. I was his ship, his grave, his monument. My timbers would slowly rot, my iron rivets would turn to rust, but my shape, my spirit, my story would be held here, in the cold, patient embrace of the earth. I was a dragon, sleeping under a hill, waiting. And now, as the story ends, feel the weight of the earth, the gentle pressure of time. The roaring fire of the day has been banked. The shouts and battles have faded into a distant echo. There is only the deep, quiet dark, the silence of the tomb, the stillness of the sleeping dragon. Let the darkness be a comfort, a blanket of soil and stars. Let the silence be a harbor, a safe port from the storms of the waking world. You have made your voyage. You have fought your battles. Now it is time to rest. Let your ship come to shore. Let the waves of sleep rock you gently. There are no more shores to raid, no more oceans to cross. There is only the long, peaceful journey into the quiet lands of dream. Sleep now, sail on.